It is 2:30, so we will get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for being with us today for the final panel in a series of Facebook Live panels on coping during COVID-19. This event will remain on Seattle Children's Facebook page, and a recording of this panel will be available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. We will be updating seattlechildrens.org/coping and COVID with resources and information. Just a note that we are not discussing COVID-19 from a medical perspective, nor are we interpreting CDC or Washington state guidelines. For this information, there are COVID-19 specific pages on seattlechildrens.org, the Washington State Department of Health website, and the Public Health Seattle and King County website. Today, we're discussing sustaining coping skills during COVID-19. The panel will discuss skills and tools for about 40 minutes, and then we'll save 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. Please feel free to submit your questions anytime. I'll start with introductions and have people wave as I introduce them. My name is Kashi Arora, and I'm the moderator today. I'm a mental and behavioral health project manager in Community Health and Benefit. With us today on the panel, we have Scott Hampton, the manager of Seattle Children's K-12 Education Services, Tyler Sasser, a psychologist and director of behavioral treatment in the Pearl Clinic, an ADHD and behavior clinic, Kendra Read, a clinical psychologist and director of anxiety programs with Seattle Children's Outpatient Psychiatry, and Jim Mancini, a speech and language pathologist and director of parent education and outreach with the Seattle Children's Autism Center. Thank you, panelists, for being with us today to share your expertise. We typically start by sharing a little bit about what we're hearing from families in our community right now. So Scott, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what we're hearing.
Yeah, thanks, Kashi. It's really great to be here today. And, consistently, we continue to hear families are having widely varying experiences. We're hearing about some really great things. Today, one of my teachers was sharing about a student they're working with who used to really dislike school and was a reluctant learner, reluctant in attendance. And he was expressing that actually this time of a school closure has really helped him reflect and see that school was a place of safety for him and a place where he really found friendship and connection and has realized he really does enjoy learning. And so, this school closure for him has been positive in that kind of personal growth and reflection. We've talked to a lot of families they're exercising more, they're gardening, they're setting future goals for their family, they're teaching personal responsibility to their kids in new ways, they're kind of refocusing on what their own family values are. We're seeing an expansion of telehealth options, and families are expressing that that's really helpful when there's barriers to coming to a facility to be able to access care remotely has actually really improved some outcomes for them. But we're also hearing a lot of struggles. Families are sharing about the ways that this is not easy. Yesterday, one of my teachers shared about a student who their family has limited English proficiency and needs to talk to their school about the education plan, and the school's really been unable so far to secure adequate translation services. So they feel stymied in their efforts to support their child. And, we know families don't have access to babysitters and playdates and other forms of childcare that would allow them to focus on their job responsibilities, which we know obviously is really important to a family's kind of overall dynamic and health. We know that families who have children with autism or other intellectual disabilities or behavior challenges, this continues to be a tremendous hardship. There's lots of challenges that they're facing. We know there's loneliness, decreased frustration tolerance, growing challenges with personal mental health and well-being. And look, we just keep hearing families say they're tired of arguing about the details of school and schedules and finances and groceries and risk exposure and, just genuine decision fatigue. So we know that the experiences are widely varied. And our goal today is to just say, we see you. This is not easy. The hard work you're doing to care for your family and to manage your priorities and personal responsibilities, it really matters. You're doing a good job. For many of you, the skills you previously had and the ones you've acquired for coping with this are really being tested. And there's probably temptation. I know in our own house, there's temptation to say this just isn't working anymore. Our hope is that today you could find some encouragement to keep going, and hopefully gain some strategies for the continued road ahead, however long that road ends up to be.
Thank you. With this huge variety of experience from families, Kendra, I wonder if you could just give us some context for what we should be thinking about as we frame this conversation.
Absolutely. One of the most important things I want families to remember in this incredibly hard time is that kids are resilient. We believe this absolutely, and it can be really hard to keep this front of mind when we're dealing with so many really hard things. But I just want to hold that up. Kids are resilient. It is not a foregone conclusion that they are going to come out of this with major lifelong problems. Kids surprise us all the time in that way, and I want to extend that to adults too. We all have the capability of resilience, and certainly there are things that test that or foster resilience. But the struggle piece, so many families are struggling right now, and we just want to emphasize that we hear that, and you can struggle and be resilient. We can do hard things and be resilient, and there's a lot of a really important and helpful growth that can come at these times. So just wanted to say that we believe in you. We believe in your children, that they will be resilient, and that there are things that we can do to foster that resilience.
Thank you. I will just add that, we started the series on coping during COVID-19 almost exactly 2 months ago, and that feels like a very long time ago in a number of different ways. We know today that this is a much longer road than we had perhaps realized back in March, and so that's really the focus of today's conversation, is what can help us sort of sustain and stay the course, for lack of a better term. So there might be skills and tools in here that you're already using, and if that's the case, we want to encourage you to keep doing that important work. If you've been struggling to establish healthy coping skills or routines or things that slipped lately, which makes sense, we want to offer some of these as a reset or a refresh. So Scott, we'd like to go to you first. We're nearing the end of the academic year. This looks wildly different than people expected. What advice do you have for parents and families as far as at-home learning?
Yeah. First, I just want to validate it's not easy. It's not easy to kind of on a dime, like we had to switch from being parent as your primary role in the house to having to decide each moment, am I parent or teacher? Am I mentor? Am I observer while my kids do their own problem solving? What is my role right now? So I just want to say it's not easy. My wife and I are both teachers. We have struggled mightily in this time because we're not used to teaching our own children, and it's different. The dynamic is different. I think one thing that would be really important is to go back to one of the things that we thought a lot about in the beginning of these school closures was to really focus on your family's mental health and well-being. And we saw the state kind of lead in that way, and that the first thing they asked schools to do was provide school meals to every child in their district that needed it. In that way, I think there was an indication of we want to meet basic needs first. Academic needs come second, and think of mental health as being something that fits into the needs category. From a teacher's standpoint, we can see really clearly how a student's mental health and well-being really have their and informs their readiness to learn. So when stress and chaos and insecurity about those basic needs increases, we see readiness to learn decrease. I don't want to encourage neglecting academic progress where it can be made during this time. but I want that academic progress to come secondary to the care and love that you show to your children. As a teacher, as an educator, as someone who leads teachers, I really want to emphasize that there is time to make up lost ground, even though it doesn't feel like it. And you may feel like your family is the family falling behind, and other families continue to accelerate ahead. And I just want to say our school system is working hard to figure out ways to ensure that all kids in the coming year and years have opportunity to gain ground that may have been lost or ceded during this time. In terms of thinking about next year, I think it's still pretty uncertain. What next year will look like is still being decided, and so success can be aided by doing a few things now. Documenting your child's academic progress, kind of where they've made gains and where they've really struggled. Documenting that now can really help. It does not have to be very, very complicated. So you might choose to use some, forms, tracking forms. We have some on our school services website at Seattle Children's Hospital. You might choose to use some forms like that. You might choose to just print out the report that your online learning program provides at the end of each lesson or level that a kid's in. You might just print that and throw it in a folder. You might just simply keep a binder of all of the completed work. Just file that away. That is a form of documentation that come next year when you're like, oh, did we do double digit addition, or have we mastered simplifying linear equations, or all of these things. You could just flip through that and go, oh yeah, look, here's a worksheet that was completed, or here was a level that was completed. So documentation can really help as you can communicate and partner with your school. I would love to see kids really focus on cultivating their love of learning. Whatever form that looks like in your home. In my home, I have a kiddo who wants to be a reader but lacks some confidence. And so every day, part of her school plan is she just reads books to her younger sister. And it's been just like the sweetest moment where it's not challenging her reading level, but it's growing that confidence that she holds in reading. And it's creating this kind of sister bond that we as parents really love. So, it could take forms like that. It could take forms of gardening together, where you're thinking about watering, kind of the process of gardening. All of that is sequencing, right? Which we think of as a math skill, a reading skill, and a writing skill. Sequencing is a really important thing. So you think about that with gardening. You think about that with fixing a light switch that broke, or preparing a recipe for dinner. So really kind of cultivating, hey, you are a learner, and it's happening all day long. Finally, I want to just say the work you put in this year does matter. And this is the tension that my just incredible group of teachers at the hospital holds every day. But when a kid's hospitalized, there's an impulse to say, we're going to wait on school. We're going to focus on medical treatment. And that is okay. School systems have a way of recouping that lost time. And where there's capacity for doing work during that time, aids and adds to the foundation that a kiddo has when they return to school. So everything that your kiddo does now does matter, and it's held in tension with my first message of focusing on mental health. And so what I would say is, every time your child accomplishes something, celebrate it. Just really, really celebrate that. As teachers, we don't correct every mistake. We correct the ones that are part of that day's lesson, and we encourage self-correction on previously mastered skills. We don't correct everything. We celebrate, celebrate, celebrate. And that's what I want to encourage you all to do. Finally, just a quick plug that the end of the year is full of milestones, and your kiddos are thinking about those and longing for them. I know my kids are used to hosting an ice cream party on the last day of school in our cul-de-sac. We're not going to do that this year. So the improv rule of say yes and applies here. When your kids come up with an idea of how they want to celebrate their milestones, say yes. And how can we do that? Let's think about how it gets modified during this time instead of starting with no, we can't this year. Really go with their idea. Say yes and how can we do that?
I love that yes and as we think about the end of the school year, lots of kids and families are thinking about summer plans and how we're going to prepare for a very unique summer. And Jim, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about summer and also think about what our kids and families who might have an autism spectrum diagnosis or an intellectual disability might want to be thinking about as we prepare for the summer.
Sure, great, Kashi, and thanks Scott and Kendra for kind of setting the stage, because some of the things I'm going to say are right aligned with what both of you say. I think that 2 months ago we were thinking, all right, well, how are we going to get through this? How are we going to get through school? And what I think that I've noticed, and this is true for people within the autism community and outside of the autism community, is that human beings learn to adapt and adjust. And I think that and that's what we've seen. And so that's been exciting. There's been great silver linings. There's great stories. I think one that I've heard all over and over again is just increased family connections. Going on the daily family walk, right? Having a family movie night, and as a parent of teenagers, that's special, right? I have a graduating senior this year. She picked up her cap and gown, at her high school. It was great, so thinking about what Scott said about, making it special, and even if it's different, it can still be special. So, and as Alice Cooper says, school's out for summer, but school will not be out forever. So important to remember that. So what are some options? And I've heard from multiple families that, they knew it was going to happen, but when the camps were canceled, it was like a bomb just fell. And so it's struggle. Our summers are thought of as, all right, well, we're going to do some summer vacations. We're going to do some summer camps, and being outside and doing things that, we have to, again, just trying to figure out how to adjust. And I love what Scott says about, let's not worry about academics. Let's think about what are some skills that we can learn, and I think that a lot of times we talk a lot about, especially within, teen and kids who are on the spectrum and who have intellectual disability, is working towards independence, and I want to just kind of, when I talk about independence, it's independence, for your child in whatever skill that may be, right? Some kids are going to be working on, kind of simply doing things on their own, and not necessarily needing the help of parents. Other kids, are going to need their help, the help from caregivers. And that's really important, right? To kind of think about that. Pick 1 or 2 goals. Think about, teaching adaptive behavior skills, teach about daily living skills, and thinking about what Scott said about gardening. Create a project, right? Can you build something this summer? We're big cooks at our house, and my daughter cooked us all dinner, including a lemon meringue pie last week. So, and we were like, my wife actually did fall out of her chair in surprise. So, so there's these great stories and these great opportunities to kind of to capitalize on this opportunity for increased human connections, family connections. I know a family who's, they're working on simply cleaning and putting your clothes away, right? And I think that's a great goal. How do you sort the clothes? How do you put the clothes in the washer and then into the dryer? How do you fold them and put them away? I think those are all skills these are skills for life, right? That we all need to learn, and it's a great opportunity to focus on them. I would ask the question to yourself, if am I doing something that my child could do on their own, right? Or could learn to do on their own? And if that's true, if you say, yeah, they could do that, think about how you might be able to create the steps for that. I am going to be using there's a website that that I think Kashi's going to include. It's called the Affirm. It's a website out of North Carolina, and a lot of the things that I'm going to be chatting about are included in that. It's specific for families who have children with autism. Continuing to support communication, including supporting how well kids understand what's going on, and providing opportunities to express themselves, right, at whatever level they need, and how do you support that ability to express your feelings, express your worries, express, your wishes and hopes and desires, right? I think all of those things are valid. Continuing with routines, right? And I think that we have routines that are older and are established, and like when we think about sustaining, we're going to keep continuing with those. Think about new routines. How do you establish some new skills and new ideas for learning, opportunities for learning. I have a woman I was working with, I work with. She has an adult son, and she said one of these great things that she's learned is that he has felt, an increased feeling of competency, right? That he has, all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm going to make my own schedule. What a great goal for our kids to say, hey, you are in charge of making up your own schedule. So at 10 a.m. every day, he calls his grandmother, right? And what an awesome, opportunity for social interaction. I'm sure his grandmother is thrilled. It's an expectation. It's predictable for him to get through the day. And he's looking forward to it. And that feeling of independence that he feels, is not, maybe wouldn't have occurred, prior to this opportunity. So a continued focus on socialization, and one of the things that has been really remarkable to me is that, the social rules changed like that, right? All of a sudden, all right, well, how you interact, how you communicate with people, had to change. And, video calls, at first seemed so odd. I started one with my mom who lives in Rhode Island, and every Sunday she's like, are we doing the Zoom call this week? Because she loves it, and now I'm getting to see my family members that I didn't get to see, right? I have a friend who has pretty impacted by autism, and we had a short call with him and we talked about The Simpsons the whole time. And his mom said afterwards, like, he was more engaged during that time than I've seen him in a long time. So look for those opportunities. How can you find new ways? I know a dad who learned video games, so that he and plays with his kids now, right? And that was, again, how do you connect, find those shared interests? And the kind of final comments here is, how do you, there are going to be some new skills that are going to be required, as we re-enter, as school begins. So, school will come back in some way or form, and we will be back with, socializing with other people. How do you wear a mask? That might be really hard. And I know that some families, I know from personal experience, families who said, my child will never wear a mask, but they worked on it and the child's wearing a mask, right? So if you say that to yourself, don't give up, give it a try. What is 6 feet away, right, from someone else? What are the new rules of social interaction that we can work on now so that they can be prepared for when they do return? Seek support from your teachers, from your, there are opening up your therapists. DDA is providing kind of more support, and stay informed, right? And to kind of, echo what Scott said, be intentional, think about, documenting what you've done. And if there's any losses of skills, document that. And just stay on top of the information, because it is this ever-changing, moving target, that we're all trying to figure out where it's going,
Absolutely. And with that ever-changing landscape of information, and as we start to think about reopening and getting back to some semblance of a new normal, that might be increasing anxiety for people, or the feeling of uncertainty is definitely there. So, Kendra, I wonder if you would want to talk a little bit about how we can manage that feeling of anxiety and uncertainty, or maybe even overwhelm right now.
Absolutely. So I think as we've gone on and this marathon has increased in length, uncertainty is one of those things that has grown along with it. Now, whereas back in March, we were thinking maybe to about this point, now we're looking forward to July, August, September, the end of the year, next year. We're not sure what's going to happen or what life is going to look like. There's so much uncertainty and so many things that can feel anxiety provoking around that uncertainty. I'm hearing a lot as a provider who specializes in anxiety and OCD, hearing a lot from families around worry about um, when things reopen, as mandates change and things start to open up a little bit more, feeling really worried and uncomfortable about when is it okay to put ourselves in that situation again. How I know we're allowed to approach these situations again, but it's still feeling very uncomfortable. Hearing a lot from families that are saying, actually, right now, we're not experiencing a lot of anxiety, but we definitely anticipate more anxiety in the future as school starts up again, whether that's in person or just next year, whatever next year looks like. Um, Next time that we interact with other people socially. Because of coronavirus or just because social interactions are sometimes anxiety provoking. So there are so many pieces about the uncertainty of what life looks like now and will look like in the near future that can absolutely be hard to tolerate and make us feel really nervous. So just wanted to review some of our tips for how to what to do with that anxiety. And I think the overarching thing, both for parents and for kids, is to we want to build mindfulness over that experience, both for yourself as parents and for your children, without pushing that feeling away like it's bad. As I've said in previous Facebook Live events, if you're feeling anxious right now, it is not an indication that you are doing it wrong. It is not a symbol or a sign that something has to be fixed. It is certainly uncomfortable though. So where I see a lot of families get stuck in a really hard place is pushing that feeling away. Like, we can't have it. This feeling is bad. So it's almost like metaphorically inviting anxiety to come sit next to you. You don't have to let it boss you around, but the more you resist pushing it away and become mindful over it, the better you're able to tolerate its presence, and then the less power it has over you when it doesn't need to have power over you. So all that said, I think the first thing that I always advise is that parents really become aware of their own feelings around anxiety, their own thoughts and behaviors related to those feelings of anxiety first. The way that you think and act as parents has a huge impact on your kids. And it's not to say that if your kids are anxious, you're to blame. It's just that parents are powerful. You are the most important people in your kids' lives. And so, how you interact with the world is a huge model, a coping tool, learning tool for your kids. So, being aware of what's going on for you and focusing on how you're adaptively managing or tolerating anxiety is key. Part of that is just really labeling and noticing when you're feeling anxious, and the other is really focusing on that piece of being a selective and critical consumer of information, including your own thoughts. Our brains have a tendency to go to the worst case scenario, to filter in only the bad stuff and forget about the good stuff, to predict what's going to happen in the future, even though we don't actually totally know, to read people's minds when actually none of us have the power to really do that. So being careful about and catching ourselves when we fall into those thinking traps is really key. The more you talk yourselves through these steps, the more you model for your kids how they can do the exact same things. And part of that is being aware of how you respond to your kids' anxiety. We are not built to tolerate our kids in distress, and it can be hard to tolerate when your kid is anxious. But being just kind of sitting in that place and being mindful together of like, we are feeling anxious right now. Of course you're feeling anxious, and talking through what's an adaptive next step forward. As we start to think about life opening up again, really starting to think, both for parents and their kids, about what are those anxious thoughts? What are our actions? What are we doing? And checking that against our trusted um, resources or sources for medical information, like the CDC, the Washington State Department of Health, just to make sure that we are not going way over and above what would be recommended by our medical colleagues. Anxiety has a tendency to make us do that and to start justifying that action in a way that becomes not very helpful and starts to really interfere in our lives. So I'm thinking a lot about a lot of the kids that I see or hear about who have trouble going outside, even though going outside isn't the problem itself. It's about your physical distance to other people, given the spread of coronavirus. So really keeping in mind, where am I going far outside of what's recommended by the medical team? And again, I think for a lot of the things that are coming up in the future, where we are not sure what's going to happen, would just encourage families to keep these recommendations in mind in order to come up with a coping plan for the future. We do not know for sure that your kids are going to feel anxious. It's not a foregone conclusion that they are going to struggle, but we can have a plan for if they do. And having a plan ahead of time helps to normalize this experience. And it also helps us be way more successful because it's hard for all of us to problem solve in times of real crisis.
Thank you. And that is the perfect segue to what I would really love for Tyler to get some time to talk about, which is, when we're overwhelmed or stressed or exhausted, we may not be the parents we would really like to be. And so what can we do to parent in the best possible way when we are feeling this overwhelm or stress or exhaustion?
Yeah, I think I can pick up right where I think Kendra left off there. When things are stressful like they have been, and reflecting back to, as others have, to our first and second and earlier events like these, when things are stressful, and like the automatic thing to have happen is to have an emotional response, and that we're hardwired that way. And it's to keep us safe, right? It's important that we have like a bias towards threat and harm and detecting those things in our environment so that we can keep ourselves and our families safe. And those things can, right, when we're flooded and we have kind of like a strong emotional response, sometimes we talk about it like the emotional brain kind of taking over in those moments. And we can rarely stay in that place for very long and act and respond effectively. And after the first couple seconds there, it really no longer continues to be helpful to us. And one of the things that I've been talking a lot with families about and have been finding quite helpful is to compare kind of this emotional automatic response, this emotional brain, with kind of like, I think a way that we've been discussing is almost like a firefighter type of a response, right? So thinking of like a firefighter as almost like a first responder who always has to be on alert for stressful, for emergency situations, and be ready to respond and be ready to respond resiliently in those moments. And to override the emotional brain, the emotional response. It's not that firefighters don't experience a stress response. They are human. It is being able to have, like, I think a goal that a lot of us have for our children is that all feelings are okay. We can have strong feelings of fear, anger, jealousy, frustration, those things, and that our actions, that we don't act on those things necessarily with our words or our bodies. And so in a similar way, the firefighter is having an automatic emotional response, and just being very mindful about, what is my body doing in this moment? What are my words saying or conveying in this moment? So to Kendra's point about anxiety, it's that I can have these strong feelings of fear in the moment. And then, and what is my body doing? Am I acting on those things? Am I talking about those things? Am I seeking out those things, right? And in a way, reinforcing that. And I think, I think that's been quite helpful is to try to give parents like a plan almost to think about this. Like, so we've been discussing this idea of like a stop plan, and I talked a little bit about this, I think, in our second of these events, but just to elaborate a bit more on it, you know, identifying what are routine daily, like, tricky situations that we're encountering with our kids, in our work, in our relationships, whatever it might be, that are causing stress. Because it's rarely that one-off type of a thing. It's usually that we feel like we're under kind of constant stress and are feeling a degree of, I think, something maybe that like burnout can almost be it, like burnout with the stresses of parenting and being a teacher and attending all my Zoom meetings and doing my work, right? That there's a degree of burnout with this, and identifying where are these really challenging moments and putting together a bit of a stop plan, which is that, you know, when that situation occurs, initiating like a firefighter would, time to initiate my stop plan. Step one, the S is, it's an acronym. The S is stop. Don't do anything. And by don't do anything, I mean have no behavioral response, no actions, no words, at least for a moment. and the key is take a step back. It's literally, before I do anything, I need to get a little bit of space so that my emotional brain doesn't run away with me, with my words and my actions. And the O is to really observe, right? What is my impulse to do right now? Like, I'm gonna observe inside of me. What do I want to do right now? What is the emotional brain trying to get me to do here in this moment? Whether it's fear, frustration, on and on, right? What's the emotional brain telling me to do? And then the P is proceeding mindfully. And believe it or not, proceeding mindfully is often doing nothing. Do nothing, right? And especially in parenting, and I know that this is going to sound like, Tyler, you are an idiot. This cannot possibly be true. I'm increasingly a believer in the do nothing parenting plan. If it's do nothing or have the emotional brain take over, right? Do nothing in that moment is a better plan, right? So that means intentionally decide, all right, I'm going to do nothing. I'm not going to respond to this provocation or to this behavior, because if I do, it's probably going to be with maybe like a criticism, right? Like I might jump on or maybe I'm going to lecture or try to reason with my kiddo to why they should wear a mask and like try to talk them into it, when of course there's no reasoning in this moment, right? I'm taking a step back, and I'll give maybe a quick example. I can tell a personal example with this would be useful. As I've been working on this with the families in our programs, I've been trying to explore this personally, right? To see like, okay, how can I better understand ways to make this useful to people? And one of the examples that come to my mind is that during COVID and things, we're spending more time together as a family, and I was finding that I was losing my patience, like over silly, like inconsequential things. Where then later I would feel regretful about it and think, oh my gosh, you dope. Like, why are you doing this? And it would cause tension in ways where, but in the moment, it was very hard for me to see that. Like in the moment, I felt very justified. Like I was clearly right in these moments. And because it was causing stress here, and as I was thinking about how to apply this, I said, all right, I'm gonna take one of these situations that is predictable to me, that I like routinely fall into a trap. And it was when my wife and I are in the kitchen together and we're doing some kind of cooking activity, although I'm a terrible cook or chef, when we're doing like an activity together and she says, well, you know, maybe you could, she's trying to be legitimately like a coach or a teacher because I'm a know-nothing. She will do a little bit of that. And suddenly I react as though she has offended my chef skills. I mean, I can't believe you would tell me how to cut an onion. Me of all people. I'm so special. And and I would react defensively, admittedly, to that. So I made a stop plan for that, which the stop step was say nothing. Say nothing at all. Do not allow words to come out of your mouth in response to what I perceive to be like a criticism, a judgment, unnecessary teaching, right? What the things that I've justified myself, like, oh, this is all it is. So have no response to that. And then to take a step back, I kind of had a hard time thinking like, okay, well, what am I going to do there? And I landed on, all right, well, everybody says the thing like count to 10, which to me sounded absurd. Like, that is an absurd suggestion. I'm a psychologist. I was like, of course I do not need to count to 10, but I was like, well, it's part of these steps and I'm telling parents to do it, so I guess I better do that. So I put it in my stop plan. And then the O was to observe the reframe, I guess, is like, I'm like trying to observe my urges and my impulses in that moment. And my urge is to defend myself from this attack, right? But that assumes that this is an actual attack. This assumes that my perception is accurate. And so the reframe that I did for myself in those moments was just assume the best. Assume that she's legitimately trying to be helpful to me, and that I am a know-nothing. I know nothing at all about cooking, so I assume the best. And then another one was swan on a pond. It's another reframe that I would tell myself, and that the idea there is like when you see a swan gliding across the pond, it looks so effortless and smooth, and how glorious and beautiful. But under the water, the feet are taking seriously and paddling, there's bubbles and weight, like all under there. And in a similar way, it's like my emotional brain on the inside in these moments can be going crazy, like I'm going to explode. As long as externally, I'm not giving it away, And I'm like that these two things are separate worlds. My emotional, I can separate what my emotional response from that, my behaviors. And so tried this out, enacted it in the moment. And I've shared this with a couple of people, but the remarkable thing is, I don't think she was actually being critical of her, and that I was causing the problem all along. Like, I was making these situations worse and compounding the problem, because by doing nothing and responding by giving her no feedback and just waiting, the moment passes. And it's been a real humbling, I will say, experience, because we've been married 15 years ago. 15 years yesterday was our anniversary. And we're that far in, and I think I've been responding defensively in the kitchen for a very long time. And now I'm not. And it was shockingly within my control. My point here is more that as parents, how we respond to a perceived challenge, our response, it matters enormously. The challenge is real. But first and foremost, we can never be effective or helpful if we are responding in an emotional place, from an emotional place. And so I think that's really what I'm wanting to share today, is that be planful, I think, is that think about what are the steps I can take and how can I self-regulate. And the last thing is Kendra's point, modeling. What have I then modeled for my children instead of my defensive responding to be able to receive feedback and instruction?
Thank you. And thank you for being willing to share, your own experience of this tool. I think it's hard to sort of picture for people who might hear about a tool in theory, what that would even look like in their own lives, right? As human beings with friends and kids and partners, how do I even put that into practice? And so I hope that was helpful for other people, because I'll say the first time I heard it, it was really helpful for me. So thank you for being willing to share that. I think we want to go to take some questions from our Facebook audience. This first question is sort of an amalgam of questions from a couple of different people talking about seeing increasing social isolation, and wondering how to help their kids cope with that. And then also seeing worsening anxiety in their children, separation anxiety coming back at the age of 8, whom, they might not have been having that previously. So, Kendra, I wonder if I could put this question to you about what we can do if we're seeing worsening mental health concerns in our kids.
Sure. So the first thing I want to say is that we're going to talk about some strategies that you can try, and there are resources out there to help you if you get stuck. So I don't want you to feel alone, that you have to tackle this all by yourself. We're here. So reach out, and we can, whether it's Seattle Children's or many of our community partners are happy to help. With worsening anxiety, so I'm going to use the separation anxiety example there. What we really want to do is acknowledge that this is hard for your kids and express confidence in their ability to tolerate whatever is difficult. And then we want to set up what are called exposures. Exposures are the most important tool in our tool belt in terms of how to address problematic anxiety. And exposures essentially just mean facing your fears, right? And that we can brainstorm some safe, COVID-friendly ways of facing fears, and even in a pandemic. So this might mean setting some specific goals. So if you notice where separation anxiety is coming up, whether that's at bedtime or when one caregiver has to go to the store, or even within the house. Sometimes it's hard for youth to be alone in one room while their parents or caregivers are in another part of the house altogether. So we start to set some goals for where we are now and gradually expanding that distance, right? So our goal might be to stay in the living room while mom and dad go out to the backyard to do some gardening, and our goal is 10 minutes alone. And we want to reward and reinforce and recognize all those small moments of bravery, and then gradually shape that into something bigger. We don't have to jump right in the deep end at first, but we also don't have to take this like minute by minute if we can take some bigger steps too. So we can be flexible with exactly how we approach that, but the key is to help your kids face their fears in those situations. Yeah, Tyler, go for it.
Well, I just wanted to speak as a parent on this too. Both my kids have a little bit of that anxious streak that I would say kind of waxes and wanes, right? And I think that is very normal, right? That depending on life stressors, and this certainly constitutes one of those, 100%. Right? That you would see like temperamental anxiety or something that had even resolved kind of reemerge. And I guess like one of the things I try to like keep in my mind with my own kids is when it does reemerge, for very similar, I think, to the stop, although I haven't applied this specific skill to it in this situation, is that is to believe in my child, like believe that they can face their fears, believe on their behalf that they can tolerate distress, that they can be brave. And so if my daughter, for instance, is saying she's too scared to go in her room and play, she wants to play with her toys, but is too scared to go in there, and is asking her brother or one of us parents to always be in there with her, it isn't a sustainable plan. It's not like a functional kind of a thing that we can do always. And so I'll try this thing that I learned a while back that's called like reflect and redirect. And it's essentially saying, oh, I think what I'm hearing is the worry monster. I think that's actually what I'm hearing right now. And that's the reflect part. And I know you can face your fears. I know you can be brave. You got this. And then walk away. and it is not from a place of like cold-heartedness. I want so desperately to do that, but I always worry that like if I go sit in there, all it's going to do is make the worry monster grow, right, and get stronger and stronger and stronger.
I love that, Tyler, because I love naming anxiety that externalizes it. It makes it separate from your child. And then you kind of redraw the lines in the sand, right? We're like, we're a family team. We've been talking like family first all along. And we can think of that in this situation too. Family first, we are a team, and anxiety is over here. He's not part of the team, not welcome. And so we can name it the worry monster. I've had kids name their anxiety after popular TV, movie, book characters. I don't know if I'm allowed to name them in this format, but it can get really fun. And I think you're right, Tyler, being aware when you as a parent are faced with the situation of your kid feeling really anxious, of using that stop skill to say, if I act in this way, am I inadvertently agreeing with their anxiety? Am I agreeing, if I go in the room with her, am I agreeing, you can't tolerate this? You can't handle playing alone in your room.
Agreeing that the room is an unsafe place.
Exactly. When we don't agree,
the room is not an unsafe place.
Right. We don't agree with that. So what I would do in that situation is exactly what Tyler said, which is to say, hey, I hear that this is hard. Let's set a goal for you being in the room by yourself, because it sounds like this is the worry monster. And we don't let him boss us around. And you can get kind of fun and irreverent with it. But essentially setting a goal and rewarding and praising your kids for being brave.
Thank you. I want to put up the key takeaway slide so I don't forget to do that. And then I will look at the questions that we're getting from our Facebook audience. There's one here from Anita that I think I would like to put to Jim first and then let others chime in. Anita's question says, as an educator, for some kids, summer signals more loss of school, loss of summer camp, loss of family plans. After recognizing the loss, do you have advice on how to frame these conversations?
Well, that's a great question, Nita. And, I would, and I think you're absolutely right. We want to start with acknowledgement, right? Acknowledgement that there is a loss, right? And really just, your emotions are valid about feeling that loss, right? And then, and then I think you kind of can flip it and try to frame it and, all right, well, look at these opportunities that we have that we wouldn't have before, right? And taking a look at, all right, well, here's something that here's some new things that we can learn, that we can try. And I think that when we think about communication, right, we want to be really clear, so that that kids can understand, and they have that, as I was saying before, they have that opportunity to express, their wishes, their feelings, all that stuff. So I wonder if Scott might have anything else to add. That I was like, well, that would have been a good question.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, Jim, in the idea of looking for what are the opportunities that we do have. And Anita, your question really resonates in that for many kids, summer vacation in a typical year is a time of loss. For many kids, the structure of school, the nutrition, the friendship, the mentorships that they receive at school, summer vacation, we think of it as a big celebration moment for students, but for many students, it's actually really hard. And so what we're finding now is, as a culture, we're having that shared pain. And so I think maybe where my mind goes in that is where are the connections that kids can make to their community? So where are the times that they can have a 10-minute FaceTime call or Zoom call with a friend? Where can they have kind of safe interactions with other peers who are experiencing a very similar feeling this year? Because although we're having different experiences, we're subjected to many of the same guidelines. And so I think, my reframing would really be thinking about how can we promote social and growth-oriented experiences in our kids that could be adjacent to the types of experiences that they have in school.
A natural segue to one of these other questions that we've gotten about helping kids cope with social isolation. For kids who may not be able to see their friends right now, what coping or suggestions do we have about kids who are struggling with the lack of social connection right now? I don't know who actually, I think anybody would have a great answer to this, so I wonder who would like to take this.
I'll get us started, and would love to hear from my fellow panelists. For me, in tackling this with families, it's really been all about creativity. And I've been really impressed with the creativity of the families that I talk with and meet with, just in terms of how they can promote social relationships while still staying safe. Um, and so, one example that I heard that I loved was that two families went camping outside, but they camped far enough away so as to remain safe, so physically distant from one another. And they like told camp stories and like ghost stories at a distance from one another, but they were able to be relatively near each other, in person, see each other in a way that everybody could stay safe. So I loved that idea. And I think it so much of the answer to this question depends on your kids' interests, resources at your disposal in terms of transportation to different places, access to online venues for like Zoom calls or house party or all the other different apps that kids are using.
Oh, yeah.
Classic, unmuted. All right, I will say that the two questions ago and this one, I feel like I can also relate to personally. I know that there's a degree of summer planning where we will typically go and see my parents in the summertime, who are and my grandmother who's in her 90s lives with them, and so their social distancing plan is a longer term plan than I think what we will be having to do with our local community and thing. And so I feel like I think one of the nice things about having children is that I am needing to like modulate my own response to the things I experience as disappointing, right? Or the things that are lost this summer for me, and take them as an opportunity to even say like, yeah, I know, I feel you like about these losses and these things that we would typically do, and really trying to put myself in their shoes. And I really can. There are these things I'm missing out on, and also modeling a degree of coping, right? Modeling like it is a loss, and I am sad that we're not going to see grandma and grandpa and great grandma in person. That is really, really disappointing to me. And I think where I would react even to this most recent question about social isolation is remembering too that we are part of that social environment. It is not peers alone, and thinking about family activities, and a thing that in the clinical world that we call special time, right? 10 minutes a day doing whatever our child wants us to do. And I know that we all feel like, wow, I'm spending hours every day with our kids. I guarantee you, if you really assess that time, it's a lot of time with our kids where our attention is divided, where we are to some degree or another multitasking or doing multiple things or kind of being in a different headspace. This 10 minutes is following their lead. They're the boss. We do what they want. And this often is taught with young kids, but in the adolescent realm, it's going for a walk and talking about whatever their interests are without asking questions, taking over, being a teacher, you know what I mean? I'm going to teach a lesson to my child. And as simple as this sounds, it is trickier than you think. So I actually challenge anyone who's hearing this to give this a try and push yourself to do this 10 minutes, almost like a daily vitamin, a dosing, right? The 10 minutes a day of a vitamin is far more impactful than eating your annual vitamins all at once, right? A big thing with friends or whatever. It's the daily dose of positive interaction.
Yeah. I'll just add, if I could just add one thing, just a very quick anecdote. I mean, it kind of goes back to our what is a social interaction, and maybe kind of reframing that a little bit. And I know I've known be previous to COVID, the idea that you're interacting while playing a video game, maybe it's my generation that I was like, that's not social interaction, right? I'm rethinking that. And I think that that's a really good thing to be thinking about. Like, how do you, and I know, I know, neighbor who's, that his son's laughing and interacting with his friends. He's a high school kid. I've got some kids who are, I know, on the spectrum who get together on Minecraft. So I think that those are social interactions, and and that is an opportunity, to kind of avoid isolation.
Want to be thoughtful about time here. So if there's folks who plan to be with us only until 3:30, our panelists have a little bit of flexibility, so we can take another question or two. But I want to give you information about where to find more resources from us. So we have recordings of these panels as well as other resources and information on seattlechildrens.org/coping and COVID. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, to our marketing and communications colleagues, and to our audiovisual team who make all of this possible. And I know we didn't get to all of your questions today, so we do our best to respond to them, even if we don't get to them even during the panel. So with that said, I want to be thoughtful about still trying to get to some of these. So one of these questions is about anxiety for kids on the spectrum. And Jim, I think the questioner, Kristen, wanted that question to potentially go to you. Could you talk a little bit about kids on the spectrum who might be experiencing anxiety right now? And then Kendra, of course, if you have things to add.
Absolutely. And lots of times kids who are on the autism spectrum, experience anxiety, and it can be for, as many different reasons as sort of neurotypically other kids who are experiencing anxiety. So, there may be a different frame about how you might go about, providing support, in regards to, especially when it comes to identifying emotions, right? So there are some strategies out there that might be, and maybe Kendra can elaborate a little bit more on some of the strategies that help kids identify emotions. There's coping strategies, that are helpful. I will just kind of call out to autism, our Autism 200 class that we had in, I think it was March, right it was our last one in Wright Auditorium, I think. Really was focusing exclusively on anxiety and autism. So that's available on our YouTube page. So definitely worthwhile. Stephanie Pickering, a PhD who leads our autism and anxiety group, had a lot to say. So I'm gonna head over to Kendra.
I would just support what you said, Jim, and thanks for mentioning Dr. Pickering, because that's exactly who I was going to mention as well, and her expertise. What we know that kids with autism have anxiety just like everybody else in the world, and they respond to many of the same, if not all, like the same general techniques that I've already mentioned in terms of how to address anxiety, with exposures being the most important part. The things to know is that sometimes kids on the autism spectrum need more support to set up exposures, to follow through exposures, and just need more repeated exposures in order to learn across settings, because it's just a little bit harder to generalize, but just as possible to address anxiety for them. That's the big piece that comes to mind. Depending on, youth vary in general, and youth with autism vary within that category. So there's that saying, like, if you've known one child with autism, you've known one child with autism. And some youth with autism find it harder to identify and challenge some of their anxious thoughts that they have. And what can be helpful in that situation is coming up with a coping mantra, about anxiety, about I can beat anxiety, or I've done it before, I can do it again, or everybody makes mistakes, or little phrases like that they can hang on to. That can be super helpful. But the key piece is really the safe, with it, COVID friendly exposures to face their fears.
Thank you. The last question we'll take, and then we'll wrap up here, is about what we can do if we have increasing concerns about mental health issues, what to be watching for in terms of warning signs, and where to turn if you're concerned about your child's mental health. And I don't know if Kendra or Tyler wants to start with this one, but open to.
Sure. So some warning signs that you might look for are, it depends, there are many, but I would just look for big changes from how your kid was before. So increased irritability, isolation, big mood changes, big behavioral outbursts, avoiding big parts of their lives, behaviors that are not necessarily bad, but aren't helpful, like they're getting in the way, like overdoing their homework, or always having to ask you repeated questions to seek reassurance. Big changes in their eating habits, their sleeping habits, things like that. So if you're noticing marked changes from how your kids were before to now, it may be helpful to reach out to get some support.
Do you have advice on places people? Do you have advice on places people can turn to? I mean, I know pediatricians are available. Yeah. What other resources could families turn to if they had those concerns?
So, the first place I always encourage families to reach out to is your pediatrician. And they can facilitate referrals to other care centers like Seattle Children's. You could also reach out to the Washington State Mental Health Referral Service. I believe we can link some of these resources below. That is a resource that can help connect you to mental health providers in your area that took your insurance for the state of Washington. Yeah, Tyler, anything else you would add, or Jim or Scott, anything else? Okay.
All right. I'm going to just make sure we drop this mental health referral services link here into the Facebook. And then if we can put the key takeaways slide up, I'll just do some wrap up information here. That's the time we have today. If we didn't get to your question, we will do our best to respond. Thank you again to the team here for making this possible, and for all of you taking the time to be with us today, especially on a sunny Friday afternoon. Resources are available at seattlechildrens.org/coping in COVID. We hope you stay healthy and well.